This is episode 133 of the Death to Tyrants podcast. Let me tell you about one of my favorite sponsors, and that is Lucky Guy Bakery. Over at luckyguybakery.com, if really delicious, all-natural, handmade brownies sound like something you'd be into, well, this is the place for you. We're coming up on the holiday season, and I know a lot of you guys won't be traveling as much, probably as you did last year. Well, the brownies and treats over at Lucky Guy Bakery are the perfect gift idea. They come in really well-designed, handmade packaging, and each order has a handwritten note, which is a really nice personal touch that they do there at Lucky Guy Bakery. I could obviously go on and on about the flavors and tastes of the brownies. The new peanut butter bonanza bar is the most amazing peanut butter cookie bar that you will ever have. That is my Death to Tyrants guarantee. For those of you wondering if they have, something for your vegan or gluten-free friends, of course they do. Such a cool bakery, handmade items, all natural brownies, no preservatives ever, so many good flavors, such great packaging, such cool gift ideas, and they love this show. Let's give them some business. So go over to luckyguybakery.com and enter promo code DTTP at checkout for 20% off your order. It's an excellent product. They're great people. Their customer service is unparalleled. So go give them some support. Let's get to the show.
The crushing weight of the tyrant's passage had left nothing unmarked.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Death to Tyrants podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you out of Lockhart, Texas. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope that most of you were able to participate in this wild act of defiance and rebellion known as gathering with friends and family. Who knew that we would all be enemies of the state, just enjoying Thanksgiving with your loved ones? But, so it is, and so it was, and that's exactly what I did. I hope you guys were able to do the same. This episode is one of my favorites in quite some time. My guest, Matthew Erickson, we get into some great discussions here, and we get into not just being and staying a libertarian, but being able to evolve your thinking once you get to that point. It's almost like some red pills for the red-pilled, and that's, I know you guys are all red-pilled, but I think this discussion is very thought-provoking, and I hope you find that to be the case. We get into lots of philosophy. We also get into the recent election, the presidential election. Matt has some great things to say about that and where he thinks we'll be in just a few months. And you might know Matt. He is the co-host of Wealth, Power, and Influence with Jason Stapleton, formerly called The Jason Stapleton Show, of course. I believe it was the Jason Stapleton Program, to be precise. And man, I've heard him on there for a while, Matt that is, as Jason's co-host. And I always thought he seems like a bright guy, and it'd be interesting to get him away from just that particular platform and see what he's got to say on his own. And of course, he does just that today, and it's super cool. And he's getting his own podcast soon, and I'm glad to hear that he's doing that. After this interview, I think you will be stoked on that as well. He is here with us today, the co-host of Wealth, Power, and Influence with Jason Stapleton, my guest, Matthew Erickson. Matt, how are you, man?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm great. I'm glad to get you on here. I've always liked when you're on there with Jason Stapleton, and I've thought throughout time, like, man, I wonder if he's going to get his own show, because he can't just be a co-host. He's got to put his own stuff out there. And just recently, I've heard you on a few other outlets, and I was like, I knew it. I knew the guy was good, and now I got to get him on this show. You've been talking about some interesting things, and your perspective is fascinating and really cool. So I'm glad to get you on here finally.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate that. I've always been known for being someone that talks a lot. So I decided that if I'm going to talk a lot, I better have something worth talking about.
Yeah, and you certainly do. Let me ask you real quick, because I find Jason a fascinating character, and I've listened to him for quite some time. I definitely want to get him on here as well, and I'm sure you've learned a lot from him. How is it working with him?
It's really good, honestly. Like he's very so there's kind of two sides to the work that we do. So there's his actual business that he does that's focused on helping entrepreneurs, especially coaches and consultants, teaching them how to brand themselves, how to market, and really it comes down to basically teaching marketing and sales. That's kind of what branding is, but most people, especially if they've gone to business school or something like that, you've gotten a pretty stale perspective on how it all works. It's actually pretty fascinating. It comes down to human psychology and persuasion and influence, and it's not just restricted to business either. Really, like this stuff is applicable in every aspect of life, and to me it's especially applicable in the political realm because no matter what you're doing in life, you're always selling something. Mm-hmm. Anytime that you have an interaction with someone else, you're trying to sell them on something, on your perspective, on your view of the world, what you want to be the case. And right now I'm trying to sell you on this very fact that I'm explaining. So it all comes down to sales and persuasion. So that's the main part of his business. But then we also have the show, we have the podcast, and so the podcast is obviously we want it to complement the business. We want them to work well together, to not have conflicting messaging and that type of thing. And then obviously it's if part of his brand is his image and his public persona and his celebrity, so to speak, then obviously you want there to be not discordant with the podcast. You want the podcast to reflect that well. So I work with him on the podcast, and then I work with him in the business as well. And he's generally very easy to work with, apart from the typical stuff with like what he would tell you as an entrepreneur, as a visionary type. He can be scatterbrained, and he's always going from one idea to the next, and so it drives Amy crazy because she's got to try to keep up with him. But that's part of the price of brilliance, But in general, he's very hands off. He's very he's very easy to work with, really, in general. And then on the podcast, obviously, people have pointed out lately how often he and I tend to disagree on stuff. Uh-huh. And sometimes those disagreements I don't know if I would say they're heated, but they're definitely passionate. And we've had people that have messaged us after we go off the air, and they're like, are you guys okay? Like, is there ever going to be a show again? And it's funny, as soon as we get off the air, immediately it's just like, we're on to the next thing. There's no blips. There's no awkwardness. There's no, he's perfectly happy with us completely disagreeing on stuff. And then we just get right back to work and everything's great. So it's been a very rewarding experience.
Let me ask you this. I think I know the answer, but I'm not totally sure. Did you meet your wife, who you just mentioned there, Amy, in a Stapleton group back in the day?
Yes.
I thought
we
that
met
was the case.
through his Facebook group.
And now you both work. Well, she's a producer of sorts. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. So she started out just as a really active member of his Facebook group back in the day. Before, I think he had less than 1,000 people in the group when I joined it, and she was already there. And he needed, basically, the group got large enough that he needed someone to be able to moderate it and kind of hold people to his standards and stuff. It was too much for him to do. And she was one of the most active people, so he asked her if she would. And she was happy to. She was in there all the time. And then eventually it got to the point where he needed help in the business. He needed help, managing his email list and other stuff like that. So he brought her on part-time, just paid her a little bit to help out. And then, kind of one thing led to another. And eventually he needed to bring her on full-time. And it just so happened that was right at the time where so we had met, and then she moved up from LA. She moved up to Seattle. And she and I got married, and then right around that time is when he needed someone to work full time for him. And so we moved back down to LA. And so then I didn't come down here with a job. I just came down here because she was going to work with him, and I was going to pursue some other stuff. And then, like I said, I like to talk, and he needed a co-host. So it ended up kind of working out pretty well. But ultimately we have him to thank for bringing us together.
Yeah, no doubt. That's really cool. How did you personally get into politics?
Oh man. Let's see. So I grew up in a very conservative Christian family, and I remember, I very kind of faintly remember the 2000 election. I remember it going on. I remember hanging chads and pregnant chads, but I had a very, very kind of just not remotely deep or insightful view into it. I was I was born in December of 88, so I would have been about 12 at the time. So I followed it probably about as closely as the average 12-year-old would. And then I didn't really start following it all that closely until I kind of started dipping my toe into it a little bit around the 2008. 2008 was the first time I voted, and I voted for Ron Paul.
Excellent.
So I was following him at that time. I was starting to kind of get into him a little bit. My dad had started following Gary North. That was really what had gotten me associated with the libertarian view. And I wrote a research paper in college on the gold standard and this connection between countries that have started messing with their currencies and authoritarianism or totalitarianism. And I'd made that connection, and I thought it made me sound smart, kind of. So that's what I wanted to write about. And because of that, I needed to get more information for it. So I came across the Tom Woods show from there. But what's funny is that right about that same time, I was being a college student who was accruing a whole bunch of debt. I was very intrigued by these two people in politics that were starting to come on the scene. There's a guy named Bernie Sanders and this lady named Elizabeth Warren, and they were talking about student debt and the importance of we need to get rid of student debt and we need to have free college and all that. And that was appealing to me. I was like, this seems right. Like this seems to make sense. And so I started researching the economic side of it because I wanted to be able to defend that position and to be able to make my case. And so it shows you kind of how out of touch I was, that I was, on one hand talking about the gold standard and the connection with Nazi Germany and totalitarianism. But then on the other hand, I was interested in Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
Right.
And so it was in the course of researching all of that I came across Austrian economics. And so I started listening to the Tom Woods show. And once I ran out of episodes with Tom Woods, I was like, well, I'm interested in this libertarian stuff, so I want to listen to another libertarian podcast. And so I searched libertarian podcast and came across the Jason Stapleton program. And that was it. Basically around that time, so probably 2015 or so was when I really started following it just like regularly as like a full-time hobby, kind of just constantly reading and studying. And I went through the full Rothbard, and I started Bastiat and Ron Paul and Tom Woods, and then went to Rothbard, and kind of one thing led to another. So that's kind of the gist of it. I started out as a pretty confused kind of a neocon, I guess, and dabbled in social democracy and wound up at basically ANCAP. And then over the last year, I've been really, I feel like I'm getting even deeper into the theory of anarcho-capitalism and starting to look at ways that like how to apply anarcho-capitalism practically, like how to take it out of theory and into practice. But in the course of doing that, I've kind of found myself drifting away from ANCAPs and into kind of some different circles. And that whole process has really kind of revealed to me a lot more about the nature of politics, where politics comes from, what its actual role is in our life. Is it fundamental or is it not fundamental? I've really, my position on a lot of these things has been kind of changing and evolving over the last year or so. And I've kind of found myself in an area where there isn't a lot of people thinking and talking about some of the stuff that I've been thinking about. And so that's sort of where I've kind of started finding my own voice in all of this. And I think that's probably some of the stuff you wanted to get into later. So
yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
Has there been any, I don't know, even media voices or podcasters or authors in the last year, kind of in this evolution that you found yourself in, that have influenced you?
Definitely one author has influenced me the most, and that would be Mencius Moldbug.
Okay, yeah.
He's the screen name of Curtis Yarvin.
Yes.
And he's definitely had the greatest impact on me in terms of like political theory and philosophy. And then there's been a few other more. There's a couple of YouTube channels that I followed that are kind of niche. There's a guy named he calls himself Charlemagne, and another guy calls himself the Distributist. I've been listening to them a lot lately. But that's kind of it really started with Moldbug, and I hit him at just the right time, because he comes from, for anybody who's not familiar with him, his perspective on politics will be pretty radically different than anything you've encountered. It's kind of a paradigm buster when you start reading his stuff. He's the guy who coined the term the red pill with respect to politics, with respect to political worldviews, and also the term the cathedral, which people may have heard being bandied about lately, especially if you follow Michael Malice. Mm-hmm. But he kind of, it almost feels like my mind had been tilled and fertilized and was just waiting for his ideas to be planted there, just based on stuff I'd been studying leading up to encountering him, stuff that was not really even related to politics. It was more history. I was studying kind of the history of American politics, but then world history. And I was watching the Joe Rogan podcast one time and came across this guy named Graham Hancock, and I was like, his book seemed kind of interesting. So I started reading his book, and I've always found history fascinating, and I've always been a sucker for, quote unquote, alternative history. But the stuff he was talking about started really being really compelling to me. And so I wanted more. So I started studying more alternative history, and then realizing that what we call like history is really just like a consensus. We don't actually know what happened because none of us were there. So it's really just what we consider history, what we consider like objective history, is really just the thing that like the most people have agreed upon. But then it's a common trope that the winners write the history books. So then I want to know what the losers had to say, mm-hmm. because like imagine going 100 years into the future and looking back at this era right here, right. And to say you just had CNN and Fox and MSNBC and like Zero Hedge or something were the only things that you had to study what was happening right now in world history. I think we can all agree that you wouldn't get a clear idea of what was actually happening. So then I wonder, well, if the news is this famous tweet from Amused Chimp on Twitter, he said, if the news is fake, imagine history. Mm-hmm. And that was what really got me thinking, okay, I need to open my mind up and really kind of be willing to let go of my priors, like be willing to have my mind changed on just about anything. And kind of started building my worldview back from the ground up. And so I was kind of looking in the history area. I was looking at alternative history and alternative ideas about where, the age of the earth and stuff like that, kind of like far out in left field stuff. But then it just so happened as I was studying and reading all of that, I came across Moldbug, and all of his stuff he was talking about suddenly, like if I'd encountered him a year prior to when I did, I probably wouldn't have kept reading him. I would have been pretty resistant to what he was saying. But given the kind of the wandering in the wilderness experience I'd had the year before that, really kind of challenging all of my priors, all my preconceived notions, and deciding that I was willing to have my whole picture of the world be changed and kind of rebuild my worldview from the ground up. Since I was already primed for it like that, once I started reading his stuff, it just really, everything really clicked, and I realized that he was absolutely right with a lot of his analyses. And then part of that then was like, I was like, okay, well, I had this experience. I need other people to have this experience now. Like I need other people to realize that all of these ideas are out here and we haven't been exposed to them. I realized just how narrowly constricted our perception of the world is, and how much our worldview has been programmed into us. And there's people talk about there's the four different types of things that you can know. There's the things that you know. There's the things that you don't know that you know. There's the things that you don't know that you don't know. Yep. And the things that you know that you don't know. And it's the unknown unknowns are the ones that are the most interesting to me. What do I not know that I don't know I don't know?
Right.
Because I think that's where those are the things that sneak up behind you and startle you. And I don't want to be startled by stuff. I don't want stuff sneaking up on me. I want to find it before it finds me. So yeah, that was kind of a bit of a rant there. But yeah, so Moldbug is definitely the guy who's been most influential on me recently.
And his name is one that I know people listening to my show have either known about or maybe have started to hear more lately out there. If you could recommend to those listening, like start with this writing by him, what would you say?
I would say it would depend on where you're coming from. It would depend on what kind of what your background is. But I'm going to assume that most of the people that listen to your show are probably fairly familiar with libertarian canon already. Correct?
Yes.
Okay, then I would recommend. You could read his shortest piece, which is his introduction to formalism. That won't really. That'll just kind of be like, okay, it seems like this guy seems like an intelligent dude. It's not going to really rattle you. But if you really want to jump into the deep end, read his series called From Mises to Carlyle. That's the one that it'll really challenge you. It'll really challenge what you believe to be true and it'll challenge your idea of the political spectrum, how the political spectrum works, and what the truth is there, and what the highest order value for you should be if liberty is something that you value. If liberty is something that you want to see expand and grow, then he's got a pretty unique take on it, and I struggle with this, with trying to figure out how to explain this to people, because it's like libertarian people especially have like an immune system that they've built up, like an ideological immune system where they're immediately resistant to specific ideas. There's specific buzzwords that as soon as you hear them, you're like, nope, that's just into the dustbin immediately.
Right.
Like you can't even consider it. And that's what I meant by saying that I'd had my mind kind of tilled and fertilized and waiting, primed for these ideas to drop in there. But the long and short of it basically is that he advocates monarchy, and a form of monarchy. And for anybody who's read Hoppe, that's Democracy, the God That Failed, he kind of starts dabbling in the idea there. But Moldbug really takes it and runs with it. And I think he's exactly correct with his analyses of the political spectrum, and his commentary on like the Whig view of history, and that liberty is not. So this was something that I'd been kind of coming to on my own, is that liberty is not a thing liberty is not a thing. This is a problem with libertarians with their messaging. Liberty isn't a thing. Liberty is a not thing. Liberty is an absence of a thing.
Right.
And the thing with people is that an absence of a thing is not appealing to someone. You can't sell nothing to someone. You have to sell something to them. So the libertarian political message, if it's just, we want to leave you alone, that's never going to sell to anybody. And because in a democratic system, in a system that at least pretends to give consideration to the opinions of the people within it, it doesn't matter how right you are, your system of ideas has to be appealing to people. And the problem with libertarianism is that it's only appealing to libertarians. So there needs to be a higher order that a value that you're offering to someone, something positive that you're introducing to someone, rather than something negative. And I mean that, like, positive versus negative is in adding something versus not adding something.
Right.
So basically Moldbug's thesis is that liberty is descendant from order, that you have to have order, you have to have the law.
Yes.
And that without the law, you can't have order. And so he says the opposite of law is anarchy. And obviously all the anarchists, all the ANCAPs will lose their minds when they hear that. Oh, that's not really anarchy. We're not talking about, spare me. I've been there. Like, you're talking to someone who still views himself as a radical anarcho-capitalist, where I see myself going as even more radically anarcho-capitalist. That monarchy is the most radical anarcho-capitalist perspective, because monarchy is really just privatizing the state. It's
Yes.
privatizing the state in the hands of a single person.
Right.
And the single person owns the state. And what that does is it creates the correct incentive structure for creating the ideal positive outcome. There's obviously, this isn't the whole thesis here. I'm not expecting you to just, have everything click and be like, oh yeah, okay, there we go. Now I'm persuaded. Moldbug himself is extremely, extremely wordy, but I think he's a fantastic writer, and I think he makes a really, really good case for his ideas. So yeah. So anyways, long story short, that's the from Mises to Carlyle, I think would be the best place to start for someone who's already familiar with libertarian ideas.
And I think a simple analogy to use for what you're getting at there, that last bit is I think of it as property. If a homeowner versus a home renter of sorts, and with democracy and not a monarchy, you get a lot of renters. And I think a lot of us see in society where, there's incentive to care about the property when you own it rather than just a renter for a few years.
Right, correct. I was just listening to, I found the audio. I listen to audio better than I read. But the problem with his stuff, this is one project I might set into, is actually getting genuine audio readings of his stuff. Because as it is right now, for the majority of his stuff, if you want to read it, if you want to have it read to you, it's just like screen reading software on YouTube, which can be a little, it can be a little funny with some of the words. But so I was listening to that this morning, and he was specifically addressing this idea of property, and like he's reading from his bit here in one spot. He says, "It's only a short step from seeing the state as an enforcer of voluntary and binding obligations to an enforcer of involuntary and arbitrary obligations. No society can possibly exist without uncontracted obligations. For example, property, and in particular real estate, represent a class of obligations behind which there is no principle but historical accident. I am obliged not to trespass on your land. I did not agree not to trespass on your land, but I am obliged nonetheless. And why is it your land rather than my land? Because it is. Everyone is born into a web of involuntary obligations. The family. No one gets to pick their parents. Moreover, every family is part of a human society and thus accepts the obligations of that society. You do not need to go to Carlyle for an explanation of the relationship between slavery, family, and community, for you can find it in Aristotle. Indeed, the definition of family in most times and places has included slaves." And he says the relationship of master and slave is a natural human relationship, that of patron and client. And so what he launches into there is really what's been probably the most controversial part of his corpus, where he's what he's doing is he's outlining Carlyle's position, but he's also kind of providing a defense for it at the same time. And he's essentially arguing that slavery is a natural condition. It's a natural human relationship, and that it's always existed in one form or another. And so like serfdom is a form of slavery. Mm-hmm. And this next phrase here, he says, serfdom and slavery can be described as micro-government and nano-government, respectively. In government proper, the normal human role of patron is filled by a giant impersonal and often accidentally sadistic bureaucracy, which is sovereign and self-securing. In serfdom, this role is filled by a noble house or other large family business, which in turn is a client of the state and just as fixed to the land as its serfs. In slavery, mastership is exercised by a mobile individual whose slaves go with him. Democracy here appears as simply a mechanism for controlling subjects by deluding them into believing that they control the entire enterprise, a pretense which cannot be maintained in the context of serfdom or slavery. In this role, it is certainly unnecessary, as physical enforcement technologies are quite sufficient. The mind control state is obsolete. And that's one thing that's very interesting, is that an autocratic state or an authoritarian state really doesn't care what its subjects believe, because if the subjects have no control over the outcome, if they aren't voting on the outcome, then it doesn't matter what they believe. They're free to believe whatever they want. And to me, controlling what people think and believe is the most insidious form of tyranny, because a deviation from truth is the greatest evil possible, because evil is by definition a deviation from truth. So the problem with a representative form of government is that representative government can't exist. It just doesn't. By the nature of human organizations, with the exception of like at very, very small local scales, in any situation where there's some sort of a representative government, you get the H.L. Mencken quote where he said, the average man doesn't want to be free, he just wants to be safe.
Right.
So any person who's going to be represented, they're just going to delegate away their sovereignty.
Yeah.
They're just going to give it away to whoever offers to make them safe. So then they're not the ones who are actually, that person isn't representing them. The person is representing their own interests, and this other person has just delegated his interests to go with yours. So I think that one of the biggest issues with the current system is not that it doesn't give people enough freedom, but that it's a lie. The system does not accord with reality. We don't actually have a voice. We don't actually have a say in the system. It goes on without us. And it goes on irrespective of what we have to say. And the thing with a monarchy, or even if it was a totalitarian dictatorship, at the very least, there's no question about what sort of system it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's this is another more recent Moldbug coinage. He said there's the difference between a 2-story state and a 1-story state. And what we're seeing now is we're going from a 2-story state, which is, that you have the Democrat story and the Republican story. We're going from that increasingly to a 1-story state,
mm-hmm.
which is effectively then a one-party state. And it's the story that matters the most to me, because if you can control people's minds, then nothing else matters. And if my mind is controlled, then nothing else matters to me. Above all else, I want my mind to be free. I don't care if my body is chained, as long as my mind is free. And I don't want my body chained either, but ultimately I want my mind to be free. So the situation we found ourselves in with this system that's masquerading as representative government is one where everyone is kind of participating in a charade or participating in a lie. And the thing with a lie is that ultimately history selects for the truth. So as we go throughout life, as we're progressing forward into the future, there's this constant, I don't know if it's on a quantum level or what, but there's this constant selection process for the truth, where everything is selecting for the truth, with lies and evil and falsehood is all going to ultimately be sloughed away. And that sloughing away process is painful. So above all else, I want to have the truth. I want the truth to be out there. I want people to be able to access reality for what it is. And as we increasingly move into this 1-story state, fortunately, I think that our overlords are being far too heavy-handed with their propaganda, and it's becoming obvious that it's a 1-story state.
Yeah.
It's becoming obvious that there's an official narrative that is a departure from the actual facts on the ground.
Hey guys, let's take a minute to talk about one of our sponsors, and that is Lorenzotti Coffee. I love these guys, not just because they were our very first sponsor, but because, like I've said many times, their coffee is so damn good. If you guys like coffee that tastes the way coffee is actually supposed to taste, with natural flavors that come from the region and the roast of the beans, rather than from artificial flavorings like some other brands use, well, then you'll love Lorenzotti Coffee. If you're a real coffee drinker like myself, you don't want these weird flavors in your coffee like key lime pie or blueberry muffin. You want strong, traditional flavors that actually come from the beans themselves, and that's exactly what you get with Lorenzotti Coffee. You can get Lorenzotti's signature Venetian blend. This stuff comes right from Italy, okay? You can do whole beans, medium fine grind, which that one's actually perfect to use in the French press like I prefer. It comes in these really cool, beautifully designed, resealable tins that ship to you hermetically sealed and keep the coffee very, very fresh. Guys, I cannot speak highly enough of Lorenzotti. They're lovers of liberty. They love this show. They support this show. So why not support them by getting yourself some damn good coffee? So go to lorenzotti.coffee. That is LORENZOTTI.coffee. Guess what? We got a promo code, and that, as you know, is DTTP for Death to Tyrants Podcast. You'll get 10% off your order at checkout. Again, that's lorenzotti.coffee. Enter code DTTP at checkout. Let's get back to the show. I have a feeling that to you, Donald Trump fits in here somewhere, at least maybe a pushback to what you were just talking about. And I've heard you say that you voted for him. And where does he fit in this scheme that we were just discussing?
Where he fits is, ironically, as a beacon of truth. And not that he always tells the truth, but that he, as a phenomenon, brings the truth to the surface. When he injects himself into the system drops its mask and reveals itself for what it is.
Yes.
And when the system reveals itself for what it is, people realize that, and it clarifies how they should act. When we see the truth for the first time, it'll tell you, like we've all had this experience where you realize something that you didn't know, and suddenly you realize, oh, all those things that I was doing before, those were I shouldn't have been doing those. I wasn't gonna get the outcome that I wanted because I wasn't even working toward it. I didn't have all the information, and so I was actually working at cross purposes with myself. So when Trump reveals the system for what it is and people realize that, like, that's the first step to changing the system. And there's a lot of libertarians have gotten bogged down on all the wrong stuff with Trump. Like, oh, he spends too much money, or he only pays lip service to the anti-war message, or whatever else, or even like people who've even complained that he's like that he's undignified, or that he's undignified to the office of the presidency, which is absolutely preposterously absurd to me for it to come from a libertarian.
Yeah.
If anything, I want the presidency's office to be degraded because that's part of pulling back the curtain on the shambolic system that we're a part of right now. But to me that's his role. He reveals the system for what it is, and my mind is still open to the idea that there's a little more there. There's potentially some type of 4D chess kind of there, the stuff people talk about. I think it still remains to be seen, but I think the dots are there that can be connected if you want to connect them. That would show, for example, with the current situation here, we know that it's a fact that Trump planned this run for the presidency for decades. He's been planning on running for president since at least the 90s. And we also know that he's been talking about voter fraud and illegal voting for a long time, at least since 2012. And he's been consistent with that. That's been, for a guy who seems kind of flaky sometimes, he's been 100% consistent, hammering that over and over and over again. And then coming up through this year, he was hitting it over and over again, specifically predicting what was going to happen, that the Democrats were going to engage in voter fraud and they were going to steal the election. And so all of that put together tells me that, like, when I watch his behavior, then the man's not a stupid man, and he's planned for this circumstance and he's specifically predicted it. So then the way that he's been handling it, the fact that I don't know how many different details I want to go into, just the fact that he has been very clearly not acting the way you might expect him to if he thought he was fighting a losing battle. He's been behaving very strategically. I'll say that. All of these things all put together, they lead me to believe that there's more going on than meets the eye, and that he's a guy who has a plan. And he's restructured the leadership at the Pentagon. He took special forces and basically created a new wing of the military, reporting directly to the Secretary of Defense. These aren't the actions of someone who thinks he's fighting a losing battle and is going to be ousted from office shortly. Those things don't square for me. So I think that there's more to him than meets the eye. I don't necessarily think that he's like some secret agent who's been tapped since the 60s and is has been like a Manchurian candidate. I don't buy all that necessarily. Although I wouldn't rule it out. One of my rules of thumb is that I don't want to believe anything, because by believing things, I'm by default saying I don't believe these other things. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to rule anything out because my perspective is never absolute. I don't have a fully objective universal perspective. So I'm willing to be persuaded on anything. But that's my perspective on him, is that the biggest service that he provides is by revealing the system for what it is and calling out the system for what it is. Like the fact that we have a president who talks about how bad it is that we go to war and that we were lied into a war in Iraq. Like, that alone is a win to me, mm-hmm. because to have that narrative being preached from the Oval Office is a sure sign that the system is falling apart, that the system isn't going to be able to continue to sustain itself, because someone who believes that got himself into the Oval Office. That's a massive collapse in their defenses for their system, for trying to keep outsiders locked out. But I think going forward, we're going to have to really reconsider what we believe to be the ideal sort of system, and the ideal set of actions we want someone like Trump to take, if we want to bring about a society that's organized in a way that fulfills the values that we want.
Do you still see him as the president come February 2021?
Yeah, no question.
Interesting. No question.
No question.
because I have a lot of listeners. I don't know, I've got too big of an audience to know all of them, but I know a small segment of them. That's going to make some of them very, very happy to hear that. And then I know I have just kind of libertarian listeners that aren't particularly either here nor there on Donald Trump. But I think what you've been discussing gets to a broader point than Donald Trump, the person. In fact, my last guest was a friend of mine, Alana Mercer, and she refers to it as the process of Trump is what's important, not necessarily the man himself. I have noticed the same thing throughout the last 4 years, and it's one of those things I say, is he doing it on purpose, or is it just by chance? But the unmasking of some of the worst people and forces in American history, really, it's been brilliant. Is that something he's knowingly done or kind of fallen into in your mind?
That's the $1 million question. Is he kind of a self-serving, just sort of like power thirsty guy who just kind of has a couple hobby horses that he wanted to see change, just he cared about like immigration or something. So he was like, I'm going to get myself into the Oval Office and try to change a couple of these things and then, move on with my life. Or is he someone who has a higher purpose, has really, I don't think anybody can question that his presence there has fundamentally altered the course of the history of the future of the American presidency, the American government, the American system of government. He's completely transformed it. It'll never go back to what it was before. And I think that he's done such an unbelievably effective job there that to say that it was all just incidental almost gives him even more credit. Like to say that the guy is so effective that he didn't even try to and he still accomplished that. Like I think that even gives him even more credit. But one thing that I would bring to people's attention is that this isn't going to be compelling to a lot of people, but to some people it will. And those are the people that I would want to talk to. Trump's uncle, this isn't necessarily widely known, but Trump's uncle was a professor at MIT. And when Nikola Tesla died, Trump's uncle was the guy who was responsible for going through all of his materials and all the stuff that he had in his apartment and evaluating it for the purposes of national security or whatever. And Trump was very close with his uncle. I think that there was a lot about Tesla that we don't know about. I think that he was onto a lot of stuff that was kind of scooped up and kept under wraps. And I think that there's a lot that we potentially may learn over the next few years. And this is stuff that I'm not trying to be coy. I genuinely, it's into a realm where I couldn't even possibly predict it. It's just, I kind of have this sense or this intuition that we're coming up to kind of a major turning point in world history. And there's a lot of secrets and a lot of stuff that's gonna come be unveiled. Stuff with I don't think it's a coincidence that just recently the U.S. military is declassifying and revealing stuff about extraterrestrial things. Mm-hmm. I feel like that just can't possibly be a coincidence. And Tesla himself said that if you want to understand reality, you have to reduce it all to frequencies and energy. And Trump has such a masterful grasp on persuasion, and he's so full of energy. As a mid-70s guy with a terrible diet who never sleeps,
yeah, no doubt,
he just radiates energy. He radiates positive energy all the time. And if I found out that he had access to some type of a knowledge of the functioning of quantum mechanics or something on some level that we don't understand, it wouldn't surprise me. I don't know if that's the case. And if he didn't, it wouldn't surprise me either. But he's just such an anomaly. He's such an anomalous person with such an anomalous effect on the world. And then having that connection to Tesla like that just really gets my attention. And the fact that then he's been so emphatic about the Space Force and the fact that SpaceX has really taken off in the last few years with the connection with Musk and just all of those things. What I'm seeing here is just a whole bunch of little individual data points. And like if you imagine, like if you take all these different data points and you just pin them up to the wall in front of you, and then you start just trying to connect them in different ways to see what sort of picture shows up. That's kind of how I like to think about these things, where I want to just kind of dispassionately look at these as all individual data points and be like, okay, how many different ways can we connect these? If I connect this data point to this data point, and then I bring in this one and I loop this one in the backside, what sort of picture did I just create? What am I, if I plugged that into the reality, if I like overlaid that framework on reality, what would that tell me? What different assumptions could I make, or what else would that bring to light? And I just know that every time that I start thinking about things related to Trump, that keeps, like, you keep getting all these anomalous data points that just don't square with anything else, that just tell me that there has to be something else that's going on. But anyway, so back to the original question about the whether I think that he'll still be there. Yeah, I think that there's no question that he's still going to be there. If he's not, it wouldn't surprise me. And I know that probably feels like a cop-out, but if he's not, I think that some really, really heinous stuff has happened and things are going to be in a really bad way. But I'm not going to rule that out, because we're in such a unique time where stuff is starting to happen faster and faster, and the established order is being shaken up so thoroughly that really just about anything should be on the table, and and any of you should be willing to accept just about anything that is revealed to you over the next several weeks, several months. But yeah, I definitely think that, no question, he's going to be, he's still going to be in there in February. And I made this prediction the day after the election, and I still haven't changed my position on it. No matter what happens, I feel pretty confident over the next couple of months we're going to see a presidential candidate arrested. Yeah,
I've heard you say that, and I've repeated that to some friends of mine. That's one of your more fascinating predictions.
Yeah, and one thing I like to do is, I got this from Scott Adams. He says, make predictions. Just put yourself on the record with stuff, and then watch to see what happens, and then see if it comes true. See how close you were. See how accurate you were. But I think it's a useful thing for your own psychology, because when you make a prediction like that and you put it out into the public, it's like you planted a flag in your brain, and it makes it stick a lot more there, and it kind of livens your brain up, and it makes you think on your feet more, and you're kind of like, okay, well, I put that out there, so I need to, I can't get lackadaisical. I need to be, really conscious of everything that I'm bringing in. I need to be a lot more aware of the information that I'm reading, and so yeah, so I like making predictions like that, and and then if it doesn't come true, there's going to be plenty of people that are like, oh, you were totally wrong, and your credibility is shot, and I don't give a shit. Like, I'm doing it for my own sake, and I'm talking to the people who are interested, the people who want to hear it, the people who are interested in the same stuff I am, and the people who aren't, I wish you well.
Yeah. Hey, why does he inspire so much hatred from a lot of people? Unlike, really any politician of my lifetime that I can think of.
That's a good question.
I've got simplistic thoughts on it. People with dad issues, and he represents the things that the left has been indoctrinated to hate. A white, older man who's wealthy, not politically correct, has power, and doesn't care what you think.
I think all of that is correct, but I always go to the most like meta kind of angle on things. And what stands out to me, I think, is that our view of the world has gotten really like ossified. We have people don't really like change. We like having stuff that we can depend on and count on, and we have stuff that's familiar. And he just like bull in a china shop steams through all of that. So to me, I think that he shatters norms, and it's a good thing and a bad thing. There's like all that ossification of like, we kind of just want to just kind of have everything just be still, just kind of do its own thing, and we want to go about our lives. And he just kind of comes steaming through, shaking stuff up and knocking stuff over. And I think that it's a necessary process. Like, it's a necessary thing. When you get in your own body, if you don't move. Like if you ever sat at your desk all day and like maybe you're sitting there like working on a project or something and you're just hunched over at your keyboard and you're not moving all day, you get really stiff and like sore and everything. You stand up, your neck's all tight and you have to kind of walk and you like can't stand up straight for a little while. And like your body is meant to move. You have to move all the time. If you don't move, you will die. Literally, your body will shut itself down if you just stay stationary. And I think that human society is just like an outworking of that exact thing, just at a larger scale. It's like a fractal, a reverse fractal scale. The human society is the same way. We get ossified, and it's very easy. Like it's easy to just sit and not move. It's easy to just let yourself go. And I think that as a society, like on a collective consciousness level, we've gotten stagnant and we've kind of just let ourselves go. And he's like the guy who comes in and like just like starts like whacking on the back and makes you stand up and makes you stretch. And he's kind of like a personal trainer for our collective consciousness or something like that, that just kind of shakes things up. And that like deossification process is painful and unpleasant and like, people just want like, oh no, leave me alone. Just leave me in my squalor and my filth and let me just shrivel away here.
Yeah,
but he comes in and he shakes everything up and he rattles everything and he gets us going and gets the blood flowing and it's a painful process, but ultimately I think that it's a necessary one.
Yeah, it's like the national consciousness was atrophied basically after being spoiled and set.
Right.
For so long, and he's like, get the fuck up. Excuse my language, listeners. Right. Let me ask you, he also represents a pushback in the culture wars. And it seems to me that the left has been winning the culture war incrementally over the years and decades. And it seemed like once he arrived, they wanted to jump leaps and bounds, as almost maybe they were afraid, wait, we're not winning this one. Why do you think the left has kind of continued to win the culture war over the years?
Because they know how culture works. They know where culture comes from. They know how people work. They know that people are meaning pursuing things. People want meaning. And the right has been just so bad about giving people meaning. They have like the part of this is the libertarian impulse that's kind of embedded within the right. The impulse for free markets and limited government and all that, which again is just it's a negative proposition. It's not offering anything new. The whole like we want to take over your life. We want to take over the government and leave you all alone. That doesn't offer anything to anybody, and it's not inspiring. It doesn't get people going. It doesn't make them. It doesn't excite them. The left, for as insane as they can be, they know how to get people going. Like society is driven by the people at the margins. The radicals are the ones who drive society. Yeah. This is a thing that Thaddeus Russell talks about this in his book, The Renegade History of the United States. And then Nassim Taleb has a concept that he refers to as the intransigent minority, that all of society turns around the minority of people who say, we aren't moving. Like, this is what we're going to do, and you build around us. And that's how the radical left always ends up being. The radical left drives the bus. And then the moderate left comes behind them and says, okay, we're going to go there, but we're going to go a little bit slower. We're going to try to make this palatable to everyone else. And then the right, for whatever institutional power the right has, is basically just, okay, well, let's go there, but let's take a little longer.
Yeah.
Like they're just kind of Buckley, was it Buckley who said, he explicitly said that the conservative is the one who stands athwart history yelling stop?
Yes. Yeah.
It's like he totally told on himself. Like, how effective is it to stand athwart history and yell stop? People don't want to stop. People want to go somewhere. They want to do something. They want to be pursuing something. They want to have a higher purpose. And the right has been so unwilling so timid about offering a higher purpose to people. And the higher purpose is worship God, start a family, and make yourself the best person you can be. Those things somehow they become like like a faux pas. Like you can't say that type of thing in public society, in polite society anymore. But this is the left ultimately drives the culture always, because they're the ones who know how to persuade people, and because they play with they go no holds barred. They don't allow themselves to be held back by this like idea of we need to be decent. They take the rules of polite society that the conservatives, that the right-wing people establish, and they beat the shit out of them with it, and then go whatever direction they want to go. And that's how society has progressed for centuries now. And that part of the pain of Trump is that he comes from the right and he says, to hell with your rules.
Yeah.
And as long as the right is held in check by their own rules, the left is going to be happy because they're allowed to do whatever they want. As soon as the right starts saying, you know what, screw these rules,
yes,
we're going to do our own thing.
Yes.
That's what shakes everything up. That's what really rattles things. And that's when that's what takes power back from these leftists. That's why, people that talk about like libertarians, you mentioned some of the people in your audience who either they have the perspective of like, the elections don't matter, or both sides are the same,
yes,
or whatever. Like that. That's why I voted for Trump. Like I know that I don't think that my vote for Trump made any difference. I voted for Trump for one, just because I wanted to be able to say that I had, but for two, because the idea that these two sides are somehow the same, you will only believe that if you're focused on all the stuff that doesn't matter.
Yes.
If you're focused on all the things that are downstream from the stuff that actually matters.
Yes.
The stuff that actually matters is that the society is being dragged along right now by a cabal of insane people who are being pandered to by all of the established moneyed interests like global capital. They're pandering to these people because they've realized that they can dangle them like marionettes and use them to completely upend the apple cart in ways that will make them ultimately profit the most at the end. The people who already have the wealth and the power and the influence are the people who are going to profit the most from whatever circumstance comes. So if the apple cart gets upset, all it's going to do is drag back the people who are a threat to the people with the wealth, the power, and the influence. So all of those people, all the powerful moneyed interests at the top, they are more than happy to throw their support behind the radical leftist, insane progressive types, because they know that they're going to ultimately profit from it the most. So like that, I can't think of a more urgent, pressing concern than the idea that those people should not only have everything but the presidency, but they should have everything and the presidency. It just, the idea that that they're going to, they're going to install this patsy and like take over all institutional power. Just completely absorb all institutional power without even the pretense of pushback. And that's going to be basically the same as having this guy. Like if Trump and Bush and Clinton and Obama are all the same, then why do Bush and Clinton and Obama freak the fuck out about Trump?
Right.
If they're all the same, they wouldn't care about him.
Right.
So the fact that they freak out about him, the fact that the entire system loses its mind about him, is itself evidence that he's somehow different in some way. And I don't know if it's in a massive way or in a small way. Are we just tweaking around the margins, or are we actually fundamentally changing things? And that was my position, coming into his presidency. Now it's very clear that whether he intends all of this or not, his effect is wholesale change. Like wholesale change is coming down the pike. I posted a poll the day before the election on my Facebook, and I just said, what are the odds that this is the last U.S. presidential election? And the majority of people, as I expected, predicted in the 0 to 25%. I got a few people who said 75 to 100. And I personally at the time would have said 50 to 75. Now I would be in the 75 to 100 range because I just don't see how, like, it doesn't matter what the outcome, half the country is never going to see a point in an election again.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be invested in it. They're not going to care about it. There's no, like, I don't know what's coming next. I don't know exactly, whether we're going to get a complete wholesale collapse of the empire and a total change. At this point, I don't think anything's off the table, but I do feel more and more confident every day that we're never going to see another presidential election. And like, isn't that kind of the libertarian dream?
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't that be what you want? No presidents anymore?
Yeah, you made 2 points there that I've been trying to drive home lately, and it's like the both sides are the same is so antiquated at this point. It's very 2008, 2012. Yeah, maybe so. We're not dealing with Mitt Romney and Barack Obama or John McCain and Barack Obama. And libertarians, some of them it's like they're stuck in the time when they first became a libertarian, and they're just going, they all like taxes, so they're the same to me, or something like that, without moving along and evolving as times go, like you were saying you did, and it gets frustrating. And then another point you made that I have been trying to drive home is that one of the issues why the right has been losing is because they play the game on the field that the left designs for everyone.
Right.
And so they're playing within that structure to fight the left, while the left is basically pulling the strings from the top, and they just keep losing and going, well, next time we'll get them. And so you have to come in, if you're from the right, and destroy that field, or say, fuck you, we're not playing on it. This is our field over here. You want to join us? Give it a shot. We're not playing on yours anymore.
Right. Yes. And this was a realization that I had, I think, really as a product of reading Michael Malice's book, The New Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it really clicked for me. This idea that the left. Okay, let me back up on this a little bit. So the left wing and right wing psychology is left. Basically, the left wing is egalitarian and the right wing is hierarchical.
Yeah.
And this is why Malice has his little aphorism or whatever, where he says that if you want to find out whether someone's left wing or right wing, just ask them, are some people better than others?
Yeah.
And if they're right wing, they'll say yes. If they're left wing, they'll give you a speech. That's what it comes down to, is that the left wing people fundamentally are egalitarian. But part of that egalitarianism is that they are about removing borders. They have a globalist instinct, and I don't mean that. I'm not saying that in the Alex Jones sense, although it ultimately becomes the Alex Jones, globalists. It's a globalizing, a universalizing impulse. They want to universalize everything. This is why another Malice thing he says, that their idea or whatever is that if something isn't for everyone, then it's not for anyone. That's another very leftist thing, that everything has to be for everyone. So their goal is to break down borders. They want to break down borders between people. They want to break down borders between nations. They want to break down borders between ideas. They want to break down borders between concepts. They're all about removing those borders, because the borders are what create the structure. So they are in the process of literally destroying the structure of society, because to them they see structure as oppressive and hierarchy is abuse. So they want to remove that structure. They want to take out the scaffolding and let the structure collapse. The right wing wants to create the structure, and they want to maintain the structure. So you have one of the most right wing statements ever was G.K. Chesterton, who said, don't remove a fence unless you know what it was put there for. That's a very right-wing impulse. If the fence is there, then it's probably there for a reason, and we should leave it there. Ultimately, both of these impulses are they're threat avoidance mechanisms. The left sees a threat in oppressive hierarchy. They see established structures can be threatening because they can become totalitarian and oppressive. The right sees the unknown as a threat. So really the left is afraid of the known things and the right is afraid of the unknown things. So the right says we need to have structure and hierarchy and we need to have things in place to protect us from what's out there, what's unknown, all the stuff that we don't know about yet. The left says, the left is intrigued by the stuff that we don't know about yet. They're like, we want to talk about the possibilities and the potential and the new ideas. And so we need to get rid of all these constraints so that we can go learn new things and bring new things into the world and add new stuff. So the left ends up being creative while the right ends up being better at managing stuff that already is. But then the great irony here is that the left ends up living in the real world more than the right does, because the right says this is how we imagine our ideal world to be. So in an ideal world, we live in a constitutional republic, and everything, and the Constitution is binding. But that's like so obviously, clearly not actually true.
Right.
Ideally, it's true, but actually, it's not. So if you start living as if that's true, you're now living a lie. So the right sees themselves as the smart, enlightened ones. Like, this is, anytime you're among right-wing people, they always have this impression of leftists are just kind of a bunch of morons. These are people, they don't even know what gender they are. Ha ha ha. But the left actually accomplishes things.
Yeah.
So this irony is that the left is idealistic, but they're actually living and applying themselves in the real world and accomplishing stuff in the real world because they take things as it is. They accept the world as it is and act within the world as it exists. Whereas the right imagines what the ideal world would be and then tries to live as if they are already in that ideal world.
Right.
So in an ideal world, you come in, politics is a thing where we both show up to on a level playing field, and we sit down and we have an open market of ideas, and we discuss these things. The Dave Rubin idea, where we're just going to show up and we're going to have a discussion. Both sides are going to present their case, and then reasonable people are going to listen, and they're going to be persuaded by the preponderance of the evidence and vote for the side that's the most practical and factual. But you don't have to have more than 2 brain cells to recognize that that's not actually what happens. But somehow right-wing people have this massive holdup where they can't get past that continuing to act as if that's the case ensures your own defeat. It doesn't matter what your principles are if your strategy gets you and all of your people destroyed. Then your principles ultimately are just your principles are just decorations on your tombstone. So politics is on a continuum with war. Politics literally is war. It was conceived as an idea to replace war, because in the past you would just have neighboring tribes that would come up against each other, and the strongest one would fight and would defeat the weakest one and then rule over the weakest one.
Yeah.
So now we're like, okay, well, instead of actually going through all that fighting, that's kind of painful and messy, let's just say whoever shows up with the largest army wins, and we'll just go from there. And we're like, okay, cool, great. So the right is very interested in law and order. So the right says, okay, let's establish these standards. We're going to have these rules. This is going to be the playbook or the rule book that we're all going to play by. And the left says, okay, great. Yes, that's the rule book that we're all going to play by. Now let's start playing. And as we start playing, then it's like if you were in a soccer game, it's like the left comes out and they just like pull out like a sword and start chopping people up, and they're blowing up stuff from under the ground and launching people into the air and everything. And the right standing around, they're like, hey, that's against the rules.
Yeah.
Hey, we have a playbook. We agreed we were going to play by these rules. Yeah. And the left is like, yeah, we did. So
you lost.
We're winning.
Yeah, exactly.
So do something about it. Oh, you're not going. Oh, you have principles. Your principles prevent you from doing anything about it. Aw, that's too bad. I guess we'll just keep winning then. So the great irony here is that the left, even though the left is like idealistic, the left winds up actually being the ones who live and actually affect the real world and have an impact on the real world. So the right wing needs to realize that it doesn't matter what your principles are if you can't actually use them to accomplish anything in the real world. And that was the great aha moment that I had, I guess, in reading Malice's book, that having principles that are self-defeating means you must not care about your principles all that much, like in effect, because then functionally, like if your principles just get you destroyed, then functionally, practically, effectively in the real world, you're no different from the people who actively despise your principles, because both of you are committed to acting in a way that destroys your principles. So this is the kind of, there's a paradox here and this is where you get into the Moldbug stuff, where there's this paradox where in order to have liberty, you must first have the law. You must have order. Liberty can only be descendant from order. Without order, without an established law that everyone is forced to play by, then you can never have liberty. So this is how he arrives at monarchy. I mean, I guess I kind of give away the game a little bit, but that's how he arrives at monarchy, that you have to have an authoritarian absolute powerful sovereign who establishes the playing field, and then everyone plays by it, because ultimately the sovereign power is the one who is the exception. So you want to have as few exceptions as possible. And so ultimately you have the one king who's the exception. And anyway, so I actually don't even remember what the question was you asked originally, but that was the rant for you.
No, that was a wonderful rant, because you hit so many things that I'm going, yes, this is what I've been trying to explain. And I also would love your take, especially since you live in California. You might see it more than I do in Texas, although I am close to Austin, so I see it as well. But what is it about, I don't know, half the population, maybe more depending on where you're at, that makes them so quick to give up their livelihoods, do whatever they're told regarding masks, whether they're by themselves in a vehicle, give up their family time at Thanksgiving? What is it about this phenomenon with COVID-19 that gets so many people to just go, yes, sir?
Conditioning and lack of an alternative. Because on an individual level, an individual person says, I would rather be imprisoned in my home than imprisoned in a prison. So those are the alternatives that they're being given. Like, everyone's kind of sitting around waiting for the first person to actually stand up and fight. And I'm not saying that this is a conscious, like a thing that people are consciously aware of. I would say the vast majority of people, this is where we get back to the H.L. Mencken quote. The vast majority of people don't even want freedom. They want safety. They want to be safe. So they've been conditioned to believe that if they step outside, one of two things is going to happen. A virus is going to get them, or a cop is going to get them. So it's much safer to just stay inside. So, and to them, that is freedom. You're not free if stepping outside is going to get you killed or arrested. You're not free then. You're free when you stay at home and you're allowed to do whatever you want. I'm not saying that I'm not defending that perspective. Sure. I'm saying that's how they see the world. That's what freedom is to them. That's why these words like freedom and liberty are useless. Mm-hmm. They're like nothing words. They're nothing words that anybody can just substitute their own meaning for, which is just absolutely the worst. Like, if you're thinking from like a marketing or sales perspective, it's like the worst, least persuasive thing ever. If you're selling something to someone, then you don't want them substituting their own meaning and drawing their own conclusion that isn't what you want. But that's what using words like freedom and liberty does to people. Yeah. So people here in California, the vast majority of them have just been conditioned. They genuinely believe that there's this super bad virus that's going to get them, and then the ones who don't are like, well, yeah, it sucks to be locked in here and it's inconvenient and it's annoying, but I got heat at home and I've got my food and I watch TV and play around on social media and work from home or whatever. Like, it's like things aren't that bad, really. Even for us, like, we're really, really privileged, to use the word. Like, for us, something that's like really oppressive is having to stay at home, right, and just kind of be here. Now, I'm not downplaying it. I think that it's bullshit, and I've really haven't changed my lifestyle at all to accommodate the virus. And part of that is just kind of, I've just been blessed enough to have a life that I'm able to just kind of keep going as usual. But really, I think the most impactful thing is that people don't have an alternative. What's their alternative? Are they individually going to go mount an offensive against the state of California? If they start banding together and they try, so you get in some people who are like out on the beach burning masks and that kind of thing, but they're not threatening anything. The state is happy. Like, if that's the extent of the opposition to the state's like, what can we bring you? Can I get you a beer? Like, right. Have a happy, fun time on the beach, burning masks and not changing anything. So until people are presented with an actual viable alternative that will actually change something, but most of all, that will make them safe, until they have an alternative that to them is safer than the status quo, they're going to keep choosing the status quo no matter how bad it gets.
I want to tell you guys about a great sponsor of the Death to Tyrants podcast, and that is our friends over at Zippix Toothpicks. These are flavored toothpicks. They've got several great flavors. Check these out: cinnamon, clove, mocha, and whiskey even. But not only that, each toothpick actually contains nicotine, and I use these toothpicks all of the time. Not only are they a great alternative to that nasty habit you may be trying to stop, and that includes vaping, come on now, but they taste great. They are way more socially acceptable. They are cheaper than any alternative. Hell, I don't even dip or smoke or anything like that, and I still love these Zippix toothpicks. Out of all the alternatives on the market, these are the most cost-effective, and better yet, they are a sponsor of this show. When a small business is out there helping to support one of your favorite Liberty podcasts like this one, let's thank them by returning the support. Since you are a loyal listener to the Death to Tyrants podcast, you will get 10% off of your order by entering promo code DTTP at checkout when you order over at zippixtoothpicks.com. Once again, go to zippixtoothpicks.com. That's ZIPPIX toothpicks.com and type in promo code DTTP for Death to Tyrants podcast at checkout, and you will get 10% off of your order, and you will be supporting Zippix and Death to Tyrants at the same time. So go do it. Let's get back to the show. Is there any aspect of the COVID lockdown, mask mandate, and all of everything that goes with that? Do you think part of it's almost an experiment of sorts by the elite to see, I don't know, how far they can push the public?
Yeah, I do think so. I don't necessarily think that it's conscious on the part of a lot of people. This is kind of getting into the concept of the cathedral. Mm-hmm. That this is kind of just like an emergent consensus that is, people. It doesn't have to be explicitly coordinated. There's just an incentive structure that leads people to all kind of happening to make the same decision at the same time. But I do think that there are definitely bad actors who are using it like deliberately, consciously. They're trying to accomplish that, and to people who don't believe that, like, people tend to be kind of resistant to the idea of the Illuminati or the Bilderbergers or whatever. And my mind isn't made up one way or the other, but I do know that to just kind of poo-poo the idea of shadowy figures meeting in darkened rooms and scheming and plotting, to just dismiss that is silly to me, because the fact that that concept exists tells me that those types of people exist. If those type of people didn't exist, then that concept wouldn't exist. Because even if the concept preceded the actual people, the fact that the concept is out there means that people who are inclined that way are going to start fulfilling that role. So there's definitely shadowy figures with power and wealth who are meeting in dark rooms and dark smoke-filled rooms and scheming and plotting. It's just a matter of at what level, to what extent. I think that there's no question that among the, like, getting a ton of power and wealth and not being accountable for that, like not being accountable for the power that you have, kind of being able to get away with anything, leads the human mind to do some pretty weird shit. Mm-hmm. Like they get into really weird stuff. This is why you have things like pedophilia at the highest levels and that type of thing. Like, it's just because if you can get away with anything, then what are you going to do to be transgressive? You're going to have to keep upping the ante and getting weirder and weirder. So that's why you get Satan worship and pedophilia and all this kind of stuff. And so then, like, once you cross that Rubicon, once you open the door to Satan worship and pedophilia, then to me, I'm kind of like, I don't know how to rule anything else out. Like those things are pretty far out, and I can reason my way to where those, like, obviously must exist. So that tells me that stuff beyond that must exist too. So I know that there has to be some cabal of people out there who are deliberately pulling strings and trying to create a scenario where they can see how much they can get away with. And they're learning that they can get away with quite a bit.
Yeah, and even a lesser extent of the people in the shadowy figures in a dark room, you can see a very public figure in a very fancy room up in Napa. And here's a man making the laws for, or at least ordinances or whatever you want to call them out in California, explaining how people shouldn't gather, should have to have a mask on, shouldn't go out, et cetera, et cetera. He's seen at a Napa restaurant, French Laundry, without a mask around a group of people. And that tells you, a priori, he doesn't obviously believe that coronavirus is a deadly menace, because he wouldn't be there. I mean, the human action that we're seeing shows that. We know that he doesn't think that, yet he wants all of his subjects to think that. And so, when I saw Gavin Newsom up there in those photos, my first thought was, besides, okay, what a hypocrite, sure, but it should be that everyone in California breathes a sigh of relief. I guess it's not as bad as they tell us, because if it were, he wouldn't be there.
That's a good point. I didn't even think of it that way. Yeah, like the hypocrisy is a feature, not a bug.
Yes, yes.
Of course they're doing it. Of course they can, because they can get away with it. And, if you think that there's kind of, within libertarian circles, there's kind of two broad perspectives on that. One is, this is just terrible. We need to get active in our local communities, and we need to take over the system. And to you, I say, good luck.
Right.
The other kind of like broad perspective is just kind of this like resigned, like, whatever. We're never going to be able to do anything about it. It's, like the black pilled perspective. And what has been revealed to me just abundantly clearly over the last several months is that those people, those two categories of people, but especially the latter group, they are the reason that things persist. They are the reason they empower the system more than anybody. This perspective on that, as I've been studying all the stuff going on with the election here, and as I've been telling people, this isn't over. Like, there's more coming down the pike. Like, things are going to change. And as I've told people that I'm confident that Trump is going to ultimately be found to have won re-election, people are like, oh no, that's the system. The system would never accept that. They're just not going to allow it. Yada yada yada. I'm like, do you guys hear yourselves? Nobody imbues the system with more power than you guys. You guys are the ones who make them as powerful as they are. I don't think we can understate I don't think we can overstate the damage of the black pilled perspective. When you start like destroying people's hope and destroying people's motivation, and don't get me wrong, like that perspective, that black pilled mentality is contagious.
Yeah.
It's toxic and it's poisonous. And people who start talking and like spreading that attitude, they suck the energy out of the room. They suck the energy out of any type of movement or any type of motivation or organization that anybody has. If you want to ensure the perpetuation of this type of abuse and tyranny, get black-pilled. Be black-pilled and start poisoning other people with your shitty attitude. I've had enough of hearing people that are talking this way. Like, at the very least, believe in something. Believe in something other than the inevitability of evil. Because if all you believe in is the inevitability of evil, then what are you doing here?
Yeah.
Well, what's your purpose? Then I don't know. I just, to each his own, but I just don't want people like that around me. And it's especially rich when they complain about hypocrisy, because nothing is more hypocritical than undermining and dragging down anything good around you and then complaining that things suck around you.
Yes. Well put, Matt. That's almost like a white pill to end this. One thing that I know people are going to be thinking right now after hearing this is, where can I hear more of Matt Erickson? And I want you to plug the Stapleton Show, of course, but I believe I've heard you say you are starting at some point your own podcast in the near future, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And
when, where, how, what?
Okay. So Stapleton is the show there is Wealth, Power, and Influence with Jason Stapleton. And we stream live every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific. And we're on like basically every platform, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Jason's very active on Parler. He kind of got an in with a couple of the higher ups at Parler. So he's grown by leaps and bounds over there. I think he's gotten almost 200,000 followers in the last couple of weeks. So that's a place where you can follow him. That's where he's most active. And then as for me, so I owe a big thanks to a buddy of mine. His name is Stephen Messina. He's a regular in the different libertarian groups, but especially the Part of the Problem group. And he started talking to me about stuff, and he was listening to stuff I was saying on the show. And he kept saying, you need to start your own podcast. You need to start talking about this stuff outside of the show. And I was like, yeah, I'll get around to it. But he just kept badgering me and pestering me into finally doing it. And it was kind of like once I broke that seal of taking the first step, then I was like, okay, I want to keep doing this. Like, that's what really got me motivated. So he and I are doing the project together. We came up with a name for the show this last week. It's going to be called King Pilled.
Nice.
And so you can follow me on Twitter. Twitter and Facebook are where I'm most active, but Twitter is probably the best way to get me. And Twitter handle is @RealKingPilled. And then the same handle on Instagram. I'm trying to use Instagram a little more often. And then I haven't created the YouTube channel yet. I just have my own private YouTube channel. So if you search Matthew Erickson, you might find it. But I'll be getting it switched over to a branded account here this week and starting to get some episodes posted there. So if you want to find me right now, just follow me on Twitter @RealKingPilled, and then just keep an eye out for a podcast called King Pilled.
Excellent, man. I am so stoked. I will link to that in the show notes page for this episode. Matt Erickson, man, thank you so much for being here on Death to Tyrants.
Thanks, buddy.
Yes, sir. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that chat with Matt Erickson. I'm telling you, that was damn good. And I've got some episodes. I've got a lot of guests built up for the month of December. And after this month of December, there's some big changes coming to this show. And so it might be the case that I don't just release these once a week on Mondays through the rest of the year. I might drop a couple a week. We will see how things work out scheduling wise, but that is probably going to be the plan. And I'm about to put a new episode for the Patreon donors that donate to this show. I give them exclusive episodes, and we've got one in the bag. It should be out very soon. If you would like to become one of those donors, it's at patreon.com/death-to-tyrants. You can donate there and hear the new material we got coming out really soon. That's a damn good chat too. It's my friend Bobby Pearson that's been on the other ones with me. And of course, our friend Donnie Gebert, who has been on the show multiple times. He is also on that episode with me, and we get into some fun, crazy shit on that one. And I think you'll enjoy it. And let's see, I've told you we got multiple episodes coming out, more than usual, through the end of the year. I told you at the beginning of next year, there's some big changes, some good changes coming that I can't quite talk about yet. And let's see, find me, death-to-tyrantspodcast.com. And until next week, you guys have a great one. See ya.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram wrath. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Death to Tyrants podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.